Before the release of Liu Che, the current newest infantry commander, infantry were definitely in a bad position. They were lacking on pretty much every front, and they were easily the worst troop type in the game. But is that still the case now that Liu Che has been released? Are infantry now in a better position? Should players even consider becoming an infantry main again? Or are they still needing a little bit more love? So today, I will talk about that. I will discuss what infantry needed before Liu Che was released to become a meta troop. I will discuss what Liu Che actually achieved. Did he actually achieve what infantry needed? I will talk about our infantry even in a good place at the moment. Do I think infantry are now meta? Do I think they're actually worth the investment? And finally, I'll talk about what more do they need, if any. Do they need anything extra just to make them that much more balanced compared to the Cavs and Archers? So if you want to know more about the current infantry position, or you want to know if you should become an infantry main, you need to stick around until the end. Now, you may be wondering, why is Sargon on the screen at the start of my video? And the reason is because I think that the first issue infantry really had that needed to be solved was Sargon. Sargon was a strong commander, there was no doubt about it. He was a strong primary commander. The issue was, though, he just didn't really fit in with the infantry murderable. Like, Sargon with Alex was an okay pairing. Sargon with Harold and Tarek was an okay pairing. But overall, Sargon didn't have a strong secondary commander. And with him being the newest infantry commander at the time, you would hope that he was in a good position for the open field, because Sargon is technically released in the same cycle as Zhu Lang and the same cycle as Joan. So you would think, wow, Sargon should be really strong, considering Zhu Lang can literally beat cav units, and Joan is probably one of the strongest cavalry secondaries literally ever. So you would want Sargon to be on par with these commanders, and he was. But the issue was he had to be with Scipio Africanus, and everyone wants to run Scipio with Guan. It's a really, really strong march. All the big spenders, especially who would mainly invest in Sargon, they would mainly be the people to invest in him, wanted that Scipio Africanus with the Guan Yu, because Guan Yu's debuff was really, really good, and it still is really, really good, especially in a larger murderable. But the issue with Guan is that he only really works with Scipio Africanus. Guan Leo is too squishy, Guan Harold just doesn't exist, Guan Tarek doesn't exist, Guan Sargon is okay, but it's not very good, so Guan Scipio was the main march people wanted, but Sargon's best commander to really go with was with the Scipio, and he works okay with Tarek, but it's still not amazing, especially compared to the other commanders. So that was the main issue with Sargon. Really, he was lacking a secondary or a primary commander. I mean, he's definitely more of a primary commander. So Sargon was really lacking a secondary. He needed a strong secondary commander that Wales could go and invest in, that would work on the open field with him. And then we also know that free-to-play players wanted to replace their Guan Yu at that point, because a lot of low spenders and free-to-players who ran just 3 marches on the open field found Guan was too squishy, he's not giving him enough value, so they wanted Scipio to also get a really, really strong secondary or primary commander, because he works either way. So what really was needed to happen for infantry was that Wales needed a better secondary to the Sargon or a better primary to the Sargon, and the free-to-play low spenders needed a better secondary or primary to Scipio, so infantry needed stronger commanders in that regard. The other thing infantry needed was more debuffs. I know that might sound insane, considering Scipio has one of the best debuffs in the game, and Sargon is literally like a Tamara's 2.0, but Sargon is really only single target. Scipio obviously has a really strong debuff, Guan obviously has a really strong debuff, so players who wanted to replace the Guan needed a strong debuff to take his place. They didn't want to just dump Guan off because you're going to lose his silence. They either wanted another silence or some unique feature that would really make Guan more, not obsolete, but less useful than the newer commander. Because often, you'd release Sargon and you'd be like, alright, Sargon's giving a really nice skill damage increase, but it's one target. He's more of a whale commander in that regard. He's got a lot of stats, but really, his debuff is just one target. Guan Yu's still got the AoE, he's still got the really, really good silence, so there's no point in replacing him with my Scipio yet. So as free-to-plays, literally just skipped Sargon. He just was not a good choice for them, because it's like he's really good in 1v1s in terms of massive open fielding. He'd be good with my Scipio, but my Guan's going to work better because I'm getting the double AoE. So players wanted an AoE, strong debuffing commander like Guan Yu, with enough stats to really put him in the meta. And then the other thing infantry needed was to beat cavalry units. They just needed to beat Cavs, because at the time, infantry were literally not able to beat Nevsky and Joan. Unless you're running a Scipio and a Sargon, it was losing in, I think it was like 7 out of 10 reports to the Nevsky Joan. It was something dumb, and that just shouldn't be the case. Cavs should not be beating infantry, and the reason they were losing is because infantry were just really lacking on the current pairings. Either you put the absolute meta, which is Scipio and Sargon, but you run just one march, or if you run 2 marches, which would be maybe a Sargon and a Tarek and a Guan Scipio, then they're both going to lose in a 1v1 against Cavs, except maybe Sargon trades a little bit better. So they were in a very bad position, and the fact they couldn't beat Cavs, you couldn't really make more than one march if you wanted a meta march. They could beat Cavs, and if you wanted 2 marches, you're investing in commanders that are either rally, and you're pretty much forced to do it, or they're not going to work too well in the open field, and it was just really, really messy. Infantry were not in a good spot. There was not enough synergy between commanders, and a lot of players who were infantry mains switched to Cavs, especially Cavs, and a few switched to archers. So it was just a bad time for infantry before Liu Che's release. But has Liu Che really fixed those issues? And the first one Liu Che fixed is he's an amazing secondary or primary to Sargon. Like, it is a really, really strong march. It's one of the best 1v1 marches in the game. It is arguably Liu Che's best open field pair. It is arguably Sargon's best open field pair. And it makes Sargon meta again. It's like, okay, he's bringing a good debuff now, and I can justify it since I've got a really, really good AoE and lots of stats from Liu Che. So a lot of the higher spenders nowadays are going to be running that Sargon with the Liu Che, and that means they've still got the option to run the Guan Scipio, so they can still benefit from Guan Silence especially, which is really good when you're running a lot of marches. So the reason that's really amazing now is because now infantry have two very solid marches, especially for the higher spenders, and then obviously they still have the option of getting someone like a Tarek with a Harold. Obviously it's not optimal, but it is still an option out there, and it is good for those higher spending players who want to run more than 2 infantry marches, who want to be an actual infantry main and move in towards 3, because at this point now, you've been able to free up a lot more commanders, and especially since Gorgo is coming to the game, it's much easier to make 3 infantry marches. Obviously, she isn't in the game yet, but when she comes, it will also help infantry even more because she is a fairly strong primary. The other thing Liu Che achieved was he's a really, really, really good secondary to Scipio. There is no doubt about that either. Scipio with Liu Che is probably the current best open field free-to-play pair in the game because it's a double AoE, very strong march. They're both packing a lot of stats. They're both fairly march speed friendly, packing a lot of march speed each. And Liu Che is just a really, really strong commander, especially with Scipio and especially with Sargon. So free-to-play players now have the option to replace the Guan Yu, who they find was not trading as good and his debuff was not as valuable for a 3-march murder ball. And then the Whalers have the option to give Sargon an actual good secondary and keep running that Guan Yu, who's going to bring them a lot of value in their murder ball. So infantry right now off the bat are already in a much better position since you can properly run 2 marches, or you can run just the 1 march, which is a Scipio with a Liu Che, which is similar to running a Boudica with a Zuj. It's similar to running a Nevsky with a Joan. So basically, infantry have gotten their secondary commander that they need to make a strong infantry march, a strong solid march for a 3-march murder ball, which most free-to-play players tend to stick around because it is the most optimal marches. The other thing Liu Che achieved to make him a better version of Guan in some ways is that he's bringing AoE and he's bringing a lot of unique features and a lot of debuffs. I know it may not look like he has many debuffs, when you read his active skill and you read that 4th skill, there's a lot of debuffs in it, especially if you've got Scipio. You can almost justify replacing the Guan Yu. Obviously, Guan Yu's debuff is definitely much stronger, but because of the extra stats and the extra damage and the extra sustainability and extra march speed and the smite damage, which is just a new feature that's absolutely destroying, you can easily justify replacing the Guan Yu, and it allows those free-to-play players once again to really get a much stronger infantry march, like running a Boudica with a Zuj, because when Zuj first released, a lot of players began to replace their YSG with Boudica because, well, Zuj was just a stronger version. I think that's what Lilith was really going for with Liu Che, and that is a good thing for the game because I think Guan has been in the meta too long, and a lot of players were like, we can't really replace him, like, what are we going to do? Harold with the Scipio? Guan is still just better, so they needed a better version of Guan to allow those players who wanted to replace him to get a good option. So Liu Che definitely did fulfill that. And the final thing he did do was he brought unique features to the game. There is definitely no doubt about that. Obviously, I mentioned the smite damage before, and smite damage is really, 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 really strong. There is no doubt about that in any way. The smite damage is just strong as. It destroys anyone with skill damage reductions. It's getting really interesting bonuses from normal attack, and it's working quite well in the open field. And the other thing Liu Che bought, which is amazing, is he bought an amazing expertise with a 25% chance to launch the extra normal attack. I always go on and on about it, but it's really, really strong. And once again, it's a unique feature which gives him a step up above the Guan to justify using him on the field instead of Guan, because if Guan was better still, or if Guan held more value in most situations, why would you get Liu Che? Well, Liu Che is holding more value than Guan at the moment, so it allows those players with just 3 marches, once again, to replace the Guan and have a really solid march still, because they're still getting double AoE, they're actually getting more AoE, and they're getting lots of debuffs with it. So, Liu Che, straight off the bat, is a really good commander with Scipio and Sargon, and he's bringing a ton of features and a ton of stats, and he's a really, really good free-to-play commander as well. So, right off the bat, Liu Che has pretty much achieved everything infantry needed just alone. He's a really good secondary to Sargon, or a really good secondary to Scipio. He's a good replacement to Guan. He's packing a lot of stats. He's got a ton of unique features, and he can beat cavalry units, which is the main thing. Infantry needed to beat Cavs. Liu Che can easily beat most cav commanders. I think he literally beats every single cav in the game currently. Because he is the new infantry commander, we would expect that he can beat the cavs, and for once, infantry got dealt a good hand, and Liu Che can actually beat all the cavalry commanders. So that is a good thing. Infantry are now able to beat cavs, and they're in a fairly decent position in terms of commander pairings. So what would I say now? Would I say infantry are in a good position? And I would say they are in a good position. They are probably on equal footing at the moment with the archers. Obviously, you can run a Boudica and a Zhulang, and Liu Che with Scipio is pretty much like running the Boudica with the Zhulang. You've got two really strong commanders, and they're going to work really well together, but it's a bit more difficult to make another march, especially as a free-to-play low spender. If you're a free-to-play low spender, you could run like a Boudica Artemisia and then a Nebu Zuj or a Henry Zuj, and yeah, that's going to work, but once again, that's a bit more difficult to run on the field. It's not going to trade as good. So archers, it's a bit difficult to make two marches. Infantry, it's the same. You can run the Liu Che with the Scipio, and then if you were free-to-play, you could run a Guan Scipio after and a Sargon Liu Che, but once again, Guan Scipio not always getting the best trades in this current meta. So we're looking at infantry right now in a really, really good position. They're still very strong, but it's a bit difficult for free-to-plays and low spenders especially who aren't running 5-6 marches to really justify running 2 infantry marches. And it's the same thing for archers. I don't usually recommend running 2 archer marches unless you're moving into at least 4 to 5 marches, and even then they're not going to be absolutely optimal. This also does mean, though, that cavs are definitely still in the lead in terms of troops. They are really packing a lot more commanders. They've got more meta pairings. They've got more debuffs, more AoE. They're just really overall the current strongest troops. So at the moment, I think infantry and archers are in a good position, especially infantry. They've moved up in the position since Liu Che is released, and they are definitely on equal footing with the archers and cavs. So that is at least one good thing. Infantry are at an equal footing with 2 of the 3 troop types. Cavalry are just currently in their own league. So infantry, I think, are in a good position. But what more would they need to become on par with cavalry units? And I think that what they really need to become on par with cavs is A, Lilith needs to stop releasing banger cav commanders, and B, infantry kind of just need another solid march worth of commanders. Because at the moment, they've got 2 solid marches worth. You got like a Guan with a Scipio. That's a solid march. And then a Sargon with a Liu Che if you want to run 2 marches. It's really solid. If you want to get for a 3rd march, you have to pull in some older commanders, which aren't necessarily bad. Like Alexander the Great's decent. Martel, he's not amazing, but he's decent on the field currently. Tarek, he's decent. Harold, he's decent. Pakal is okay. So you're looking at all these commanders, they're just okay. There's nothing amazing. But when you look at cavs, you can easily make 3 strong commander marches. Like you run a Nevsky with a William, Hanchabing with a Joan, then a Zhang Yu with like a Shana Gupta, or a Zhang Yu with a Justinian. All these other marches are strong. They're just inherently strong marches. So they're going to perform slightly better than a 3-march infantry bull. So what infantry need is just a straight up another commander pairing, a whole new 2 commanders which work really well together, or a commander that works extremely well with one of the other primaries which hasn't really been given too much love recently, like maybe a Tarek with another commander in the future really, really strong, or a Gorgo when she releases with another commander in the future that could be really, really strong, and that would give infantry a nice edge into the new meta, being able to actually stay on par with cavs since you can easily run 3 marches for them. So that is at least one good thing for infantry. The issue is though we probably won't be expecting to see another infantry commander for like 8 to 9 months, so they're probably going to stick around in this same meta position for quite a while, though I don't think it's a really bad position. The other thing I think infantry need to stay in the meta is that smite damage really stays as a thing to them only. Not only would it help the other commanders still be strong, it would give those infantry something to fall back on. If I choose infantry, I know I'm going to have the smite damage, I know that's going to be strong in the field, I know it's a unique thing only to infantry, and if that sticks with infantry commanders, that's going to be really, really good at keeping them in a good position in the meta, because smite damage is an infantry thing. That means all the commanders that they release, especially cav commanders, can make them slightly weaker to smite damage, because that's going to allow the infantry to have a good meta position. So if smite damage sticks with infantry for the next couple of commander cycles, we could be expecting them to be a much stronger troop type with a unique thing unique to them. For example, like archers, they're really unique in the fact that they've got crazy high skill damage. A lot of the archer commanders are just ridiculous on skill damage, not necessarily tanky, just crazy, crazy DPS, whether it be like when Zhulang released, or when Nebu YSG was meta, or when Boudica's debuff went crazy. Archers, they're always just there for DPS. Cavs have crazy mobility and decent DPS. They're all round just strong commanders, and that's definitely something unique to them. Often they run defense debuffs. Not many archer commanders have those besides Ramses, and Cavs often run those best stat debuffs like defense, like I said before, and they are much better for players who want the high mobility, the high march speed, but they're not going to have as much DPS as archers. Infantry were meant to be tanky troops, and that just didn't work out because tankiness just meant you take more saves, and no one really wanted that. And tanky troops were slow, and it just was not good on the field. So if Lilith keeps infantry with a nice smite damage factor, decent damage, decent AoE, and they're keeping them up with meta commanders being able to beat calves and maybe lose by a little bit to archers, infantry would be in a really healthy position because they've got the smite damage, which is unique to them, and they're beating calves, and you can even tune new cavalry commanders up and down based on the smite damage, so they're not too weak to the archers, and they're not too strong against the infantry. So that's what I think infantry really need. They need new commander pairings, and they need some more smite damage to give them an even more solid position in the meta, because at the moment they're still in a really good position. There's no doubt about that. Infantry are very strong, but they could be a little bit better and a little bit more balanced, especially against the cavalry units. So infantry, I think, need more smite damage and more commanders. So now that I've said what I think about current position on infantry troops, what do you guys think? Do you think infantry are in a good position or a bad position? And the best way to tell me is through the comment section. I read every single comment, I reply to every single comment for the most part, and your comments definitely do matter. For example, someone commented that smite damage should stay as an infantry mechanic to make infantry powerful and keep them up with the meta, and when I thought about it, it was like, that is an amazing idea. So your comments definitely do help formulate my videos. They give me video ideas, and they even teach me more about the game. So consider leaving a comment down below, no matter how small it is. I really do appreciate it. I respond to them all, and I do find them all very helpful. Now, I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.